So have you heard a lot of people talk about prosperity? You know, most of the time people have this perception and idea about what they think prosperity really is. So there's a Bible verse that I want to read to you that really helps me to understand what prosper means and what prosperity is all about. Because, you know, yes, it's nice to have a nice car, a nice house, money, a nice suit, or whatever you want to call it. And that can make you feel prosperous. But today I want to share what my perspective about what prosperity is. And that's what it is. Your perspective is prosperity. So 3 John verses 1 and 2, John is writing a letter, and listen to what he says. He says, the elder unto the well-beloved Gaius. This is John whom he's writing this letter to, whom I love in truth. He said, beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in good health, even as thy soul prospereth. So what is John telling Gaius here and telling the church and telling the people? He's saying he wants your health to prosper. He wants you to prosper in all those ways that you can see. But more importantly, he wants his soul to prosper. And I'm telling you, that's where prosperity is. And we have to have the right perspective in order to have prosperity. Now, what is your soul? Well, I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and your soul is just your mind, your will, and your emotions. So think about this, your mind, your will, and your emotions. So if you can think right, you can do right, and then you can respond right. That's prosperity, but you got to have the right perspective to do that. One of the people in the scriptures that had the right perspective was Paul. Now, if you know anything about Paul, he was Saul before his name was changed to Paul, and he was persecuting the church, and he was doing all, but Paul was on a path. At that time, Saul was on a path. But he had an encounter with Jesus, and Jesus gave him a totally different perspective. And so he went from persecuting the church to purposely working for the church. And of course, you know what he went through, and he was writing the scriptures and all of these kinds of things. But there's a text that I want to pull out so that we can see Paul's perspective. Okay, I want you to listen to what he said in 2 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, the 7th through the 10th verse. And Paul was just trying to get the people to understand his perspective versus everything that he had ever been through and the work that God was calling him to do. Because this is important for you and I, because there's some work that God called you and I to do that sometimes we're trying to prosper with making money and having all these fancy things that people can see versus not having the right perspective, which is prospering in our soul. Listen to how Paul describes what's happening in his life, but also see the perspective that he has. 2 Corinthians, the 4th chapter, 7th through the 10th verse, he says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power of God, that the power may be of God and not of us. He says, we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Always bearing in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our body. Oh my goodness. Did you hear his perspective in that? Oh my goodness. He has it all in perspective. And I'm telling you, so if we want to have prosperity, we need to remember that our perspective is the prosperity. So how do we have the right perspective in order to have the prosperity for our soul? Well, there are 3 things that I recommend that we do based on what Paul just said. 3 things. Number 1, we need to learn how to acknowledge our reality. What does that mean? Acknowledge where you are. Acknowledge what you experience. Acknowledge what you've been through, what you go through. Acknowledge it, right? Don't be in this place to where, oh, this is not happening, this is not happening, this is not happening. Oh, no, it's happening. We need to learn how to accept reality. I mean, I've been places where people are experiencing something tragic and they're constantly sitting there telling themselves, oh, this is not real. This is not real. This is not real. I don't believe this is real. This is not happening. You know what? It's happening. It is happening right now. That's part of the experience. The first thing is we need to learn, just accept reality. That's what Paul accepted. Paul accepted the reality. Listen to what he said. He said, we are pressed on every side. We are perplexed. We are hunted down. We get knocked down. That's the reality. And I'm telling you, we need to learn how to just accept reality for what it is. Now, when we accept it, we don't stay there. But the first pace is just accept it what it is. If you messed up, you messed up. If you are wrong, you are wrong. Don't be in denial. Paul was not in denial. So number one, if we really want to have the right perspective in order to prosper, number one, acknowledge reality. Number two, we need to acknowledge our hope. Again, the reality is what it is, but you also need to acknowledge your hope. What did Paul say? This is what Paul said. Paul said, we are not crushed. We are not driven to despair. We are not abandoned by God, and we are not destroyed. That's hope. If that's not hope, I don't know what hope looks like. Okay, I don't know what hope looks like. You got to have some hope, but you need to acknowledge your hope. Because if you don't acknowledge, think about this. Think about going through something to where you're in denial. It's not happening. Oh, this is not real. This is not real. And guess what? If you don't believe it's real, then you can't even get to the hope. I mean, this is, when I read this is where the prosperity is. And don't you know now there's a lot of things happening in life and people are trying to explain and investigate and understand all of these things, which really has nothing to do with them. But you know what? They have lost their perspective because their perspective is about this prosperity of, well, I know this and I have access to this and information and I have money. But you know what? All of that stuff is going to fade away. Because I promise you, there are things going on right now that in 2024, you will not even care about because you'll be in another situation, in another circumstance, and you'll forget about what you're focusing on right now. Paul is telling us, and God is telling us, if you really want prosperity, get the right perspective. So number one, we need to acknowledge the reality. It is what it is. Accept it for what it is. But number two, acknowledge your hope. Paul said, I can't say it again. He said, we're not crushed. We're not driven to despair. We're not abandoned by God. We're not destroyed. I promise you, everything that you've been through, you're still here. You're not destroyed. So stop acting like you're destroyed. Stop acting like it's the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Stop acting like you can't overcome it, because you can overcome it because Jesus overcame the world. And not only that, he told us that I overcame the world, so can you. Now, he's not talking about this entire world, but he's talking about your little world, my little world, the things that are happening in my world. I can overcome it because I believe in him and he believes in me. Oh, my goodness. So acknowledge your hope. Okay, acknowledge your hope. And then the last one is, if you're going to have the right perspective for prosperity, you have to learn how to embrace grace. Oh, my goodness. Embrace grace. This is what Paul says. He said, through suffering, our bodies share in the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be seen in our bodies. What is he saying? He's saying that when we believe in Jesus and Jesus resurrected, right? Jesus overcame, he resurrected from the dead. Don't you know that we can be resurrected? I can't even say the word now. We can be resurrected from the things that happen in our life. You may feel like, oh my goodness, that almost killed me, but it didn't. You can be resurrected from it, right? It's a scene in the movie. It's not the whole movie. Stop looking at your life like it's a whole movie. It's only one scene. Listen, you don't go and watch a movie and you follow this main character in the movie and all of a sudden bad things start happening to the main character. You don't stop the movie because something is happening to the main character. No. You keep watching. That's what God wants you to do in your life. Keep watching your life. Keep watching your life. You know what? When I thought about Embrace Your Grace, so I read this book called Radical Acceptance. And I love the book because the book talked about we have to learn how to just accept ourselves and just be at peace with ourselves. There are two things in the book that stands out to me. Number one, it talks about two key aspects of the book is recognition and compassion. We got to have those two things because we need to learn how to, when we receive grace for ourselves, we can truly accept ourselves. There's a couple things that the book says. It says we can't accept an experience until we clearly see what we're accepting. So if you have an experience and you're not accepting anything from the experience, how are you going to be able to give yourself accept grace? You can't do it. So the book talks about we need recognition and compassion. Now, both of those, they need to be in together. Why do they need to be together? Okay. So if you have recognition but have no compassion for yourself, what's going to happen is you're going to become judgmental. You're going to start blaming yourself. You're going to start making excuses. And that's not where you need to be. So that's what happens when you have recognition and no compassion. Now, what about if you have compassion but no recognition? Well, then guess what's going to happen? You're going to give yourself self-pity. Because you're going to be able to have an experience, but you won't be able to understand the experience. And that's where a lot of people are. They have so much compassion on themselves, but they don't recognize what role they played in it. You know why? Because they don't understand. Paul is telling us today, we need to understand what our life is all about, but we also need to make sure that we have the right perspective because that's where our prosperity is. So what are the three things that we need to have the right perspective one more time? Number one, we need to learn how to acknowledge reality. Accept it for what it is. I messed up, you messed up, they messed up, it messed up. Accept it. You can't change it. It's messed up. Okay, we can accept that. Okay, that's reality. Now, once you accept the reality, number two, acknowledge your hope. My hope is in the Lord. My hope is in the Word. My hope is in the truth. My hope is in love. My hope is in His righteousness. My hope is in He overcame so I can overcome. Where is your hope? You got to acknowledge your hope. Speak your hope. Live your hope out. And once you acknowledge reality, once you acknowledge your hope, now it's in time for you to embrace the grace for your life. God has given all of us grace. And you know what, I love what Paul says. Paul says when he was trying to ask God to remove that thorn from his body, and every time he asked God, God kept saying to him, my grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. Don't you know God is saying that to you right now? I don't care what you've been through. It's not about what you've been through. It's about what you're going to. And that's what we need to focus on. That's where your prosperity is. You know, people come to me and all that. They say, Dr. Jones, you just don't understand my story. You don't know what I've been through. And I say, yes, I do. But I want you to understand what you've been through because I want you to understand what you're saying. See, you're already saying you've been through it. You're saying you're not there anymore. So stop being there. And most of the time, where are we there? We're there right here in our head, in our minds. Your prosperity is in your perspective. My prosperity is in my perspective. Listen, be encouraged today. Don't be deceived by what you see. Don't be deceived by all the challenges in life. Don't be deceived by people say they're going through hard times and they're going through challenges and they're going through trials and tribulations. And I hear people say something, they say, oh, somebody's experiencing something. They say, oh, it's so sad. Is it really sad? Is it sad when it's a path to your salvation? See, you gotta get the right perspective. See, because all sickness is not unto death. That's how we get the right perspective. And I promise you, your prosperity is in your perspective. Listen, I'm encouraged. I hope that you're encouraged. So let's continue to keep the right perspective about the things that we go through and the challenges that we have and the trials and tribulations that we have. Because at the end of the day, it's just trying to get us to the next phase because we have to go through things to get there. So listen, be encouraged. I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Peace.